Tom, hi. Thank you for your time. And we wanted to first start with the need and how you thought about Peak.
Great, good question. Um, so I actually have started a number of software companies. This is my first time in the eye cosmetics beauty space. My wife is an optometrist. She and another optometrist came to see me about 6 years ago and basically said people don't clean their eyelids and it is becoming a problem. So there is a disease that has the very non-specific name of dry eye disease. Essentially, dry eye disease is caused for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest is we don't blink. And one way we don't blink is when we're looking at screens. We aren't blinking as much as we do when we're walking around or doing something else. So within sort of the concept of what we've built essentially a toothbrush for the eyelids. So we have, a device that looks like this. It's not really that exciting in the sense that there's not a lot of technical stuff. Where the innovation really comes in is a change in behavior with humans, thinking about eye health as an everyday problem, not as a problem that is just, oh, my eyes hurt, so I should respond. Because a lot of the things about dry eye that are very similar to oral hygiene are the fundamental issue is you're not going to notice your symptoms until you're too far gone to really do very much about the health of your eyes.
That makes sense. So Tom, one of the questions is that there is a high barrier in terms of acceptability because you need, or in general, people need to be aware and educated about eye hygiene. How is Peak working on that? How are you making people aware about that? Because product, of course, is one of the best way to educate them. But apart from that, how do you overcome that challenge where people actually don't think a lot about eyelids and its hygiene?
Great question. Honestly, not very well right now. I wish that we had a lot more people that were coming to us saying, I had no idea. Great. Most of what we've realized is because in other spaces, the thought leaders are usually coming from the medical space to say, here's the thing you may not know about, oral health, heart health, etc. We've started off by working with optometrists. So we sell to optometrists and ophthalmologists, primarily in the United States, although we do have customers in Canada, New Zealand, some other English speaking countries. Um, and in that, we arm them to have conversations with their patients. So I'm more familiar with US data, but dry eye in the United States was at about 3 million people in
Mhm.
2000. In
Wow.
2024, it's at 40 million people. And the most recent survey that came through, sort of a reliable source that I read, said 64% of patients, when they walk in the door at an optometrist, are presenting with dry eye.
Whoa.
Fundamentally, our behaviors have shifted around smartphones, Zooms, calls. While the internet and just the idea of globalization has been a really important part of our change in behavior over the last 20 years, it's really hurting our eyes. And so, in 2021, Johnson and Johnson reported that there was a shift from the reason people go to talk to an eye doctor from blurry vision to sore eyes.
Mhm.
Their eyes are uncomfortable. That slow progression from being, not even the fourth major reason to the number one reason people are going to the eye doctor is so subtle that most people don't realize that their eyes are hurting and that they need to take better care of them. What we're going to see, though, over the next 10, 15 years is we're going to see this massive shift because we've now had enough time for people our age and younger to start seeing some of the complications from not blinking enough, not, being on a medication, having too much air conditioning. Go through the list of the causes, and whether you assert that screens are the number one cause or the number five cause, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we're seeing this huge shift in the outcomes of dry eye diagnosis in this country. It's true around the world. I mean, so what we see in the data is generally Asia, particularly China, leads on most eye related stuff. So you're going to
Mhm.
see dry eye in higher quantities in China, and then it's going to feed back into other parts of the world. So that started happening in about 2010, 2014. And so those numbers that they were seeing in China are now prevalent around kind of all over the all.
Got it. Got it. And I mean, you did mention that you have had a lot of experience working on early stage startups and growing them. on the software side particularly. Now, how does that differ when you're working on an actual product that is tangible, that can be touched and feel, and where you want to take it forward? I mean, are the
It's a really good question. You're asking great questions. So I don't know if you score yourself at the end, just you should give yourself points. Um,
yeah,
I mean, so step one, like this is just different, right? I mean, I'm holding a thing. You don't hold software.
yeah,
From a business perspective, you have a cost of goods and you have a, supply chain sort of set of challenges. So part of the reason I'm not dressed in a sport coat is, I go out to the warehouse and I hang out with people that are boxing and doing stuff. So your employees are different. So, I mean,
yeah.
culturally, the whole business is set up in a way that does scale, but has a lot more physical components to it. So, I didn't know anything about USB boards and hardware before this process. And now I feel like I still don't know very much, but it's more a function of like you realize you know more and then you kind of go on that curve where you're like, no, 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 I'm actually really dumb. And then you're going back up. Whereas, on the software side, at least, I felt like I had pretty good handles on what our cost structure looks like, on what types of
Mhm.
employees we needed. We're still struggling through that from an innovation perspective of what is the right mix of people, what is the right mix of costs, what are margins that lead to sort of scalability. So those sorts of questions are just really different than software. The other
Understood.
thing that I would say is different from software is, software, you kind of go into the cave and you cook for a year and then you come out of the cave and you're like, all right, I got this thing, now let's see what the customers are saying, and like you kind of make a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Here it's like on day one, it's like, oh, you can have revenue the day you open the business, because you have physical stuff that you can sell or resell right away to get in with your customers. So
Yeah.
there's been some of those sorts of things that are just different from this type of business.
Understood. Understood. Let's talk a bit about the product. So, I mean, you do have a patent pending. I mean, you have
Yep.
trade secrets. So, what is the aspect that the patent talks about that it protects about the product? I mean, is the innovation in the gentleness? What is it in the product that's the innovative part that needs patent
Uh,
protection?
it's a good question. So the Tom version, which is sort of like the dumb version, um, most of what patents are premised on is this idea that you're doing something really, really different. There
Yes.
isn't a product like what we've made out there. So the closest thing would be like a Foreo that you use for your whole body. Almost
Mhm.
all of those products had a very high speed associated with vibration.
Uh-huh.
And the intent was not necessarily to work with makeup. So makeup is just different, right? So makeup is structured to stick to your eyes, to do a bunch of things that isn't the case if you're washing your whole body. So
Mhm.
within that, we have had to build a couple tools into the device that make it easier for somebody to take off makeup well. And we've had to figure out kind of what the complementary products are. So we have a tea tree oil cleanser. We have worked a lot with companies that make hydrogel. Pure and Clean is one, but that they make a hypochlorous acid. We've been doing stuff with okra oil, but finding a foaming agent that can kind of help with makeup removal has been a really important part of what we're doing. And
Wow.
then, in terms of the patent itself, if you go into a world where there's nothing like it, you try to have the broadest, biggest patent that you possibly can. And that's kind of what we've tried to do, because there just isn't a product that has the same application.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. I think there's always a fine balance between what you want and what the patent office is going to allow, right?
Correct.
So I mean, it's always understandable, and everybody knows that their product has something new. I mean, it's the essence of capturing that aspect and then presenting it to the patent office that makes it allowable. But good to hear that, and I mean that brings forth a lot of questions in my mind, because I mean there are adjacent industries to the innovation and to the product that you have. So one being the medical side of things and the other being the cosmetic side of things. Are
Yep.
there any plans to actually expand or penetrate into any of these two adjacencies? Because I can very easily imagine that this brush for or toothbrush for eyelids can be a precursor to some application, both on the medical side and the cosmetic side.
So there's probably two real questions there that I'll piece off a little bit.
Sure.
One is unique to the United States. So I'm not sure how much this exists anywhere in the world other than the US, but there are these pay to play sports. And I mean, it's a big industry. So it's probably a 20 billion US dollar industry where
Wow.
kids get into sports and their parents pay for them to play on a team and then they pay for them to travel. One of those sports is cheerleading, one of those sports is dance, one of those sports. So you have these clubs. There are 37,000 competitive dance clubs in the United
Wow.
States
Wow.
that may or may not exist in other places of the world. I don't really
I
know.
was never aware about that. Yeah.
And so it's kind of a weird thing. But like if you say, how do you enter a new market? I always think about entering that market through a beachhead. And that beachhead, as we've identified, is how do we get younger people to start thinking about this earlier? So as part of competitive dance and competitive cheer, a lot of times the kids will get makeup kits at the beginning of the year so that they all have the same blush, eyeshadow, etc. And
Hmm.
so what we have started doing, and I say started, we have a couple clubs, so this is small. We've started working with them on skincare and eye care as part of the post. You're finished with your competition. Now it's Saturday night. How do you get your makeup off? How do you get, and so doing training and conversations about that. So from an entry point on the cosmetic side, we think that that's interesting because that also tends to be a fairly viral group. So that tends to be a
Hmm.
group that's going to post on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the social media craze
Yes.
is going on, and it tends to be a group where they cluster where it's easier to sell. So you go to a competition and there are 5,000 clubs at the competition, not one off, one off, one off. So I think of that as a good beachhead because it also allows us to kind of perfect price, perfect exactly what should be in the product set, etc. So we've been testing some of that now for about 6 months,
Hmm.
and that has gone, I don't know, moderately well. I would say that's more of a capital challenge than it is, So when you go into broad cosmetics, I mean, it's just super expensive. So you want to make sure you go in with the right stuff. And
Yes.
then the second question you asked, which is really like, what does the application look like? When you sell through doctors, there's an expectation that you're a medical device.
Yeah.
We will eventually probably seek FDA clearance, which is the federal drug
Yes.
administration here in the United States, to do some treatments in office for things like blepharitis. But we've very consistently said this is about eyelid hygiene. We're basically, an advanced sponge washcloth. And within that, it doesn't seem that that's very medical, but the challenge is, most people kind of score you across that spectrum. And so the FDA has very explicit things about what we can say and what we can't say. We have
Yeah.
started talking to two universities about doing research studies about efficacy. We know tea tree oil helps with dry eye. There's 15
Yes.
studies on it. We've never actually put the Peeq Pro tea tree oil in that, but there's a ton that talk about terpenforol, etc. We know generally that expressing the meibomian gland is a critical component of dry eye. And we know that because, there are multiple studies. They are not specific to our device, but they're specific to FM, intense pulse laser, things of this nature that have a similar expression component. So while we can't prove our thing does that, we're not worried about being able to do it, and we can see it clinically. So when we put magnification on the efficacy, we can see that eyelids are much cleaner. We can see that the type of tears is much better over time. But we've never done a full on study. That's the next step. If you said, how do you enter into medical, the next step is to go down and get approved on certain types of FDA
Understood.
treatment protocols. And we haven't done that, but that's something we will do.
Understood. So when I look at the FDA clearance process, sometimes it takes 7 to 11 years in
Oh
getting
yeah.
one product approved. So I mean, there are phases of clinical trial that goes on, and then that actually delays your entry to market, although you are already in the market. But when it becomes kind of a medical device, when it can get treated as a medical device, I mean, that will. Is there a plan, since you are planning to work with universities, get research approved? So what's the plan there? I mean, it seems like a long-term game.
I like that you imply that startups are super well laid out. They're like, this is the exact plan. 1 week we'll do this, and 8 weeks we'll do this. There's a rough plan. We have talked to 3 different lawyers on the regulatory side that can kind of lay out, here's essentially what you need to do. To date, it has not really affected us positively or negatively. We don't really get the question very often, frankly.
Mhm.
The other thing that you can do in the United States that we don't tell our customers, but we are aware of customers that do this, is to use things off label. So, in other words, we basically sell this as a cosmetic product. If a doctor says, "Oh, you can use this to treat blepharitis," we don't sell that way, but we are aware that people do that. Um, so there's some of that kind of muddies the water, I would say.
Yeah.
Long term, our goal, like you said, what's the vision? The vision is 20 years from now, every person cleans their eyelids, and we have a good, better, best solution set. So good would be basically tea trowel oil and a sponge. Better would be kind of a full kit that includes warm compress, vitamins, etc. And then the best would be our Weva device, plus those other products. And as we think of that, that really lines up with how oral hygiene is sold in the United States and in a lot of countries. We would hope that if we are doing that process, that we're also kind of checking the boxes on that best to ensure that we have application. My guess is we would make a more advanced device for in-office treatments. One of the biggest issues in an office is there's a device called the BlephX that's too harsh for a lot
Mhm.
of particularly older people with thinner skin around their eyes. And so we don't see that as a very big market, but there isn't a product right now that's going that way. The things tend to be going more extreme on the harsher side rather than being on the gentler side. So I would imagine if we actually went down the path of trying to have a medical device, we'd be really targeting more at gentleness rather than intensity.
Got it. And then there are two more questions that immediately came to my mind, but I'll start
Yeah.
with the first one. One is, has somebody knocked on your door? Because I mean, you are close to two very, very competitive industries. One, of course, is the cosmetic side, and the other is the medical devices side. And more often than not, in both of these industries, the trend that I have observed is that, I mean, big giants wait for smaller startups to actually finish doing their work. And then as soon as it is done, they would want to actually make it a part of their portfolio. So has there been any knock? Has there been any interest?
I
Uh,
mean, there are prospectors that go out and say, like, I'll give you $25 for your business, where it's
oh,
like, I
wow.
suppose, I mean, like, so like, has that happened? Yeah. I don't know. I've started a bunch. I don't know a business that hasn't gotten some sort of, I don't want to say absurd because I don't mean it that way. There are businesses that need to get out because they're just losing money hand over fist. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
fine. But things that are not in line with how we would value ourselves or expect to look at that. When we think about exits, we tend to think of the 2 mile markers of 40 to 50,000 users and a million users. And the reason
Mhm.
is just in the cosmetics and beauty side, where it's kind of in this border area where there's sort of hygiene, health overlay. That first
Mhm.
one tends to be about 100 to 150 million US, and then the second one tends to be about a billion US. And inside of that, like, we have relatively clear, here's who might buy us sort of thoughts. And that isn't us saying if it's not Unilever, it's not any good. It's us saying we just have watched 10 different companies get sold to three or four different players, and depending on how and where our customers are coming from at that point, we can understand why we would fit certain portfolios better. In the eye space, there's five or six big conglomerates that buy
Yes.
everything. And so, I mean, on that side alone, you're kind of like, well, these are really the five players. So again, we would imagine that one of those five players at some point would find us interesting. But we're just building a business to help people wash their eyelids. We're building a business to help, solve against this because people just don't
Yes.
do a good job. And it's not, how do I say this right? It's like we're on the edge of people all recognizing it as a problem, and we'd like to be in the public consciousness when they go, "Oh yeah, my eyes hurt." They're super uncomfortable because I look at screens all day, because I'm in air conditioning all day, because I'm on, Accutane, birth control, fill in the blank, and all of these things complicate. But we can see the data, and like businesses are great when you're a little bit ahead of the data, where you're like, "Oh, we're
Yes.
starting to figure this stuff out." So so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of
It
been
does.
the thought process.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. And then I want to talk a bit about your challenges that you may have faced because, I mean, starting small and then, so let me ask this first. Are you also planning to go for fundings,
We've
investments?
received some early stage capital, so we've raised about $2 million. My expectation is we will either raise no more money because we'll
Mhm.
stick pretty much over on the optometry side and use current cash flow to pay for marketing and things of that nature, or raise a lot more money because we want to go direct to consumer. There isn't really a middle ground, which I wish that there was sort of a middle ground, because I don't love the dilution. I don't love some of the effects of sort of
Yeah.
this idea of raising a lot of money. But like, we recognize some of what our opportunity is. And so, that is an issue that I think confronts a lot of startups, which is, should I raise money or not? If I do raise money, how much is enough? When, and particularly on the venture capital side, you just sort of get on a merry-go-round where they're constantly trying to get you to raise more money to grow faster and faster and faster.
Yes.
And so I'm reluctant to end up on that merry-go-round, because a lot of where we've struggled, to answer the question you almost asked, a lot of where we struggled is, it takes a while for doctors to get this into their workflow. It takes a while for patients to recognize the benefit. So, regardless of what you're using to treat dry eye, it usually takes 45 to 60 days to see, to be like, oh, my eyes are starting to feel better. It's hard when you're asking somebody to commit 45 days where they don't know if it's going to work. Now,
Yes.
it works most of the time, but it's the sort of thing that people are like, I don't know, I wash my lids and then they forget. And like, so a lot of what we end up doing is working on what we call compliance. So most businesses like ours would reference subscriptions. We mostly reference compliance. So if we have an office that's getting, 70 to 80% compliance, we're in a great spot from a business perspective, but they're also doing right by their customers, by
Yeah.
their patients. But that is, that challenge sits out there. And that challenge isn't a challenge that's necessarily solved by having $1 million in the bank, right?
Yeah.
It's solved by
Yeah.
getting more and better processes in the doctor's hands. And if you get more and better processes in the doctor's hands, and then you're supplementing and complementing, you end up really being able to change behavior in a way that does scale well and does become really different.
Got it. Got it. So, Tom, is there a plan or a strategy or an idea to actually make this something that the users can directly buy, decide, get educated on? I mean, is that a plan, or is this going to be more on the B2B side?
I mean, we've focused on B2B, but you can go online right now and buy. We've done some basic advertising on Google, Facebook, Meta, actually, both Instagram and Facebook, where we've tested out kind of what that looks like. Again, if you want to go direct to consumer only, you're going to spend a lot of money. Our hope is that it will be a blended approach where you'll start to get traction at 6 or 7 offices in Houston, and then you can overlay some more direct to consumer stuff into a geography where there's an existing sort of thought leadership with doctors.
Hmm.
It's coming from people that are expressing happiness with the program, and then you're also putting ads into the same demographics. So dry eye tends to get expressed more in women than in men. It tends to get expressed post menopause. So you're kind of targeting 45 to 60-year-old women who,
Hmm.
do like, that is a group that tends to organize itself around certain activities, including social media. That ends up being a pretty useful sort of double whammy, if you will. You're targeting them through the optometry office, getting that thought leadership, and then you also are maybe hitting them from a meta perspective. So that sounded way cooler, meta perspective. I meant the company meta, so it wasn't like a you know term. It was so.
Yeah, that
Anyway,
makes
I don't.
sense.
Again, I'm not sure that's a great answer, but that's how we've thought about it.
Understood. That makes sense. And usually with cosmetics industry, what I have seen is there are some people who use the product, and then they write customer reviews, and that usually is the ears to the ground for the people who are manufacturing the product. Is it the doctor's feedback or the patient feedback in your case? Are there other sources of information for the improvement, or at least the feedback process for you guys?
One of the things that is unique to what we do that provides very direct feedback is we're basically giving people a kit. So we'll give them a box. So this is Infinity Eye Care in South Dakota. We'll give them a box. In that box are products. About a week out, we call the people that receive the box. So the doctor says, hey, John Smith got a box. We call that person and say, do you know how to use everything in the box? And that instantly provides a feedback loop on the products in the box, what they're saying, what the issues are. So it's been interesting to learn about kind of what people know how to do and what people don't know how to do. on a very consistent basis. So we've done a bunch of focus groups. The number one mistake people make when washing their eyelids is they don't wash their hands first. 80% of people don't wash their hands if you just say wash
Wow.
your eyelids. And it's like, wash your hands. Second big thing is people aren't quite sure how much pressure they can put on their eyes. I think they think they're going to explode their eyeball. I don't really know, but we have a number of products, including the Wave, etc., where the goal is like small circles around these glands to make sure you're getting the tea tree oil in the lash line and then also putting pressure to express the glands. Well, you can do that really hard or you can do it relatively softly. The point is that what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get enough pressure to express the glands. But if you're uncomfortable, then it's too much. So like
Yes.
just getting people comfortable to put their fingers near their eyes is a big challenge. So we talk to people a lot about, that sort of stuff. And then a lot of people just don't know how to use stuff. Like they don't know how to use an eye drop. And so it's like, all right, well, here's some things that might help. Oh, you're having a hard time keeping your eye open. Here's some stuff. Um, and then we talk about habits. So we talk about, like my favorite conversation or my favorite one that I tell the story all the time is, do you know what a warm compress is? So a
Yes.
warm compress is, a mask that looks like this.
Yes.
Typically it has like silica beads in it, but it could have rice or other things. I mean,
Yes.
it's not specific. You heat it up, not super hot, and then you put it on. Well, I can't tell you the number of people that say, I keep forgetting to do that. I say, well, what's something you do every day? So do you drink a cup of tea in the morning? Do you have a cup of coffee? Do you have a glass of wine? Like, is there something you do every day? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, do it when you do that. And then, you follow up with them or you get an email or you get a review that was like, I was able to do this with. And you're like, I was the one that talked to her about that, or I talked to him about that. And
Yeah.
the other thing you do is you find out that people broke stuff immediately, right? I took it out of the box and I instantly did this thing I shouldn't have done. So you can send them a replacement. So we get that feedback intentionally through the process because we're trying to touch all of those consumers before we're asking them to repurchase. So that includes text and email, but we also phone every one of the doctor's patients to say, hey, we work with Dr. Clark at Infinity Eye Care. He, started you on the Peeq Pro dry eye box. We just wanted to check in. Do you know how to use everything? And like you start there and you can work that conversation into 50 different iterations. But I can't tell you how grateful people are, particularly older users, that somebody called them rather than them having to go online and try to find something. So
That does make sense.
we do get a lot of feedback that way. I'm not sure that scales across thousands and
Yes.
thousands of users, but we don't have thousands and thousands of users. We have 1,000 users. And so with 1,000 users, you can phone them and say, how's it going? What's going on?
Hopefully, it rises to thousands and thousands and maybe millions of users, in the near future. But I think, that's a solid strategy with the demographic that you're catering to right now, because they do like to actually talk as compared to simply texting or the other means of communication. That makes sense. So, Tom, with respect to an inflection point or maybe an asymmetric return on your investment, what would be one event that would change the game immediately for you guys? And because if I am working with a startup, I would constantly keep on thinking about, what's going to make it viral? What is going to change everything, right? So is there some thought on your side with respect to strategy that here's an asymmetric return, here's the inflection point, or in general, how far in the future is an asymmetric or return point or an inflection point where you believe, if we cross this milestone, that is where we are start going to grow very, very rapidly.
So the good thing about our business is we grow very consistently every month. If you said, what is an asymmetric event? It is a
Yeah.
group like Vision Source or Pearl or iDoc that said every one of our offices is going to have this, and we're going to be able to scale our training of those offices so that you end up going from 100 offices to 3,800 offices, like that. That has a huge impact in terms of just like cash flow, exposure, nationalization, all those sorts of things. If you said what's an event that helps on the patient side, I can say, oh, it's one of the Kardashians saying, hey, here's I use this product. That obviously has a big impact. But I actually think a bigger impact long term is acknowledgement of the effect of screens on the eyes on a more widespread basis where people start talking about it. So Apple in their last sort of product, well, it's probably not their last, but it was what they put out in January, February around their iPhone release, was about myopia and the effect of looking at screens and how it affects the lengthening of the eye. That didn't have an impact the way that many thought it might, because it just gets passed over. So
Yes.
I don't know exactly what it looks like when there's an acknowledgement by offices and people looking at screens all day that it's like, yeah, I actually need to take care of my eyes. So when I go in and I do education, I ask offices, how many of you brushed your teeth this morning? Everybody raises their hand. I say, great. Now, let's imagine you didn't brush your teeth for 5 months. Would you still have a job here? And they're like, no, my breath would smell terrible, like all these sorts of things. I'm
Yes.
like, exactly. I'm like, how many of you washed your eyelids today? And so this is optometry offices where people are, and it's usually about 30%. So
Wow.
70% of the people working in the industry are not taking care of their eyes.
Wow.
Like, that is insane to me. And it's
That
insane
is.
to me because these are people thinking about it and talking about it, but it hasn't even sort of like drilled down into the population of people who should be knowledgeable and taking action. And so how that happens, I can think of 52 different, you know, causes, if you will. But at some level, it's the effect that that happens that matters. And it doesn't have to be driven by Kim Kardashian. It could be driven by something dumb, you know, like somebody just complaining on Conan O'Brien, or you know, doctors banding together and saying we are going to talk about this, or an organization like Peeq running a successful marketing campaign. You know, and like it doesn't even have to be us. We just know that we're positioned now that if people start taking care of their eyes better, we will win. And we know
That
that
makes.
that will happen in the next 20 years simply because we can see the trend line on discomfort. And like eventually
That makes
people are
sense.
just going to be like, I got to take care of my eyes because I can't work. I got to take care of my eyes because I can't go outside. But that hasn't happened yet. We're not sure what the, you know, cause, the, you know, fulcrum will be, but there's a lot of things it could be.
That makes sense. I think, I mean, all of those reasons, those events are very, very plausible events. And I think we have seen things like that happening with other startups that actually went viral, that brought the issue into the limelight, that actually warranted a proper action, and that may result in what we were
The
talking
other
about.
thing is it's not a high friction cost. You know what I mean? So it's not like we're asking people to buy a new car.
Yeah.
Like this costs $25 and is about 45 days. I mean, you ultimately you can wash your eyelids effectively at about the same cost you brush your teeth. And so we're not looking for people to go do something crazy expensive. We're asking people to take a behavior that some do regularly and turn it into a mainstream behavior that most, if not all, do regularly. You know, just the same way that soda rotted people's teeth and people started to take action, you know, we're seeing that with screens and eyes, and it's just a matter of time. Now, we might be dead and gone. There might be 100 other players by the time. Like, there's 15 things that we could kind of talk through historically that I'd be like, yeah, it's like that. But we're in a good position today, and I kind of think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. But sooner is 5 to 10 years later, being 20 to 30. But you know, 30 years from now, I'll be 70 years old, and when I'm 70 years old, my eyes are going to hurt because I've done this over and over and over and over. And like I take great care of my eyes. Anyway,
Well, you do have a wife who actually invented this, so
it's
it
helpful.
does make sense. Yeah. And I think the thing with habits is it's hard to form, but it's also hard to die, right? So once, I mean, everybody actually comes on board, I mean, it's something that's going to be, like you said, as simple and common as brushing your teeth. So I mean, I think that's the point that we are all waiting for. But I think I got educated about eye hygiene and eyelid hygiene a lot talking to you, and I also got a sense of uh, your experience working with startups that you're actually putting to use. I mean, there is a solid feedback mechanism. There is a clear vision on how and what and when things are going to happen. There is a clear vision on what type of company you want to be in the future. And there is also a good expectation setting both on your side and from the consumer side, that, I mean, how soon and at what rate this is going to go. So very insightful talking to you, Tom. Thank you
Thank you.
very much for your time. There were a lot of questions that you automatically answered without me asking the questions. So, I mean, it was a great experience for me as well. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers.